thank you all for joining us today. We're super excited to be talking all about neuroscience and the brain with Sikoya Ashburn. So that's really, okay, so today is part of Black in Neuroscience Day. So actually this is a whole part of a week of really cool events and panels, and they've been doing a lot of really amazing stuff. They were written up in Forbes this week. It's been an amazing thing to watch. And so the idea is that we want to highlight a bunch of Black scientists who are doing super cool work in the field of neuroscience. And so if you want to check out more about what's going on there, you can go on social media and check out Black in Neuro. If you do that hashtag, you'll learn all about what's going on. And there's a lot of recorded stuff. So if you happen to be an academic or you're not, or if you're just interested in neuroscience, you can watch a bunch of the live streams and panels that they've had this week. And that's all linked under that hashtag. It's been just super powerful and wonderful to watch. But today we're going to be talking about the brain at a sort of middle school level. And then after this session, starting at 2 p.m. Eastern, we're going to be doing another one of these, but for a high school level of understanding. We did an elementary school one an hour before this. So it's a bit of a wonderful marathon of neuroscience today. And Sikoya, we're so glad that you're here with us today. So would you like to introduce yourself, say who you are, what you do, why you like it, and then we'll launch into the Q&A.
Absolutely. So I'll go ahead and share my screen and pull this up. So I'm Sikoya Ashburn. I'm a doctorate now, working at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. I'm excited to talk to you all about some of what I do in neuroscience, but also what I find interesting in neuroscience. And of course, before that, I will tell you a little bit more about me. So I'm from the great old state of Virginia. I actually am from a little coastal town right about there. And I went away to college. If you're at all familiar with sports or basketball, you'll know all of these colleges. But I went to undergraduate at Duke University, where I did study neuroscience, but also Spanish. And then I did my doctorates at Georgetown University, also another basketball school. And at Georgetown, I was afforded the opportunity to work on quite a few different projects and topics. So a couple of those I'll share today. But I was interested in knowing more about aging and how the brain changes when you're older. So I started off studying that and then moved into looking at children and how we learn to read while we're children. And also particularly, I was curious about how children are, or children who are have difficulties reading, how their brains are different and how we can help them through interventions. Similarly, I looked at that in math as well, so looking at kids who struggled with math. And now, as I mentioned, I'm at the University of North Carolina, UNC, and now I'm studying children with ADHD or attention disorders. And all of this came about actually when I was about your age, for everyone who's younger, middle schoolers here. So all of this started way back when at a middle school science fair project, where I just asked the simple question of, are adults really smarter than children? Because as a child, I was rooting for the kids. But it was just a little project comparing kids and adults in a puzzle. And since then, I've just been asking questions and more questions, and I never really stopped asking. So that's gotten me to where I am now. And one other thing about me is that I love brain anatomy. Really big fan of sharing that with kids. So this is a picture of me and before COVID times, where I could do in-person anatomy classes. And in my hand here, we have a sheep brain. And normally, if you were in this class with me, some of you would be super excited to see a brain and hold a brain. And other ones would be a little more skeptical, a little more skittish about touching a brain. But I think it's a great experience. So I'm looking forward to sharing some more of that with you today. And one of the questions that I'll actually pose is, how can we study the brain if we can't actually touch it? And that's something that I deal with a lot, since I'm interested in looking at reading in older individuals in a broad range of topics. One way that we can actually answer some of these questions is with a machine known as an MRI, or magnetic resonance imaging. Some of you have probably seen this. If you've ever been unfortunate enough to break an arm or sprain anything, then you've seen an MRI machine and probably have been in one. But it's really just a ginormous magnet. And with this magnet, we can put your brain or your entire self inside and take images of your brain. And those are what I will show some of today. So in an MRI, we can have kind of two kinds of images. So we can have a structural image looking at the different parts of the brain that I show here. But we can also look at function. So this is kind of a model of what your brain would look like. And the red areas are areas that are more involved in a particular task while you're doing something in the scanner. So this one is a little more useful for me, but for today, I wanted to show you a little bit more structure since I really like brain anatomy. So the MRI gives you images kind of like this, and these are 3 different slices that I show on the bottom. Don't worry about what the orientations are called, just know that you can see the brain from different angles. And some of the things that I like to point out here are, the most obvious is that your brain looks really wrinkly, right? It's kind of folded over on each other, and that's because as you grow older, well, in your very early years, you're producing a lot of brain cells, and it's encompassed by your skull. So you have to fold in over on itself so that it can have enough space to keep growing within your head. The second thing that's very easy to notice is that they're kind of 2 colors, particularly over here on the right. There's like a lighter color and then these darker colors on the edges. So the darker colors are called gray matter, which are where the cells are for your brain, and the white area is called white matter. So that's the track. So that's how a brain area that's towards the front of your head can connect to a brain area that's in the back. And the MRI, so I showed you a few pictures just a second ago, but MRI will actually spit out very many pictures. So this is just all in the same orientation in the slice shown here. And it's starting at the bottom of the head, and it'll go all the way up in many slices till we get to the top. And what's interesting here is that, yes, you can see the brain and different structures throughout. You can see how it changes, but you can also see some things that you probably recognize just normally, like your eyes. You can still see in an MRI, and you can also still see your ears. If this slice had gone down a little more, you could also see your tongue as well. And what's interesting about an MRI, so one I just showed you is a normal brain, but you can also see when things go wrong. So over here we have an example of someone who's actually had a stroke. So you can see that kind of thing in an MRI as well. So they're very useful for doctors. And as I mentioned, one of my interests is how the brain changes from childhood to adulthood and what that really looks like. So if we look at an infant brain, you can see that those squiggly lines, they aren't as defined because the brain is still growing. It hasn't fully folded over as much yet. But as you get older, childhood into teenage years, you can see it's a lot more defined, especially in teenage. You can see more of the gray matter, white matter distinctions, much easier to see. And again, for adulthood, the brain's still forever changing, so these dynamics in the brain shift quite a bit, and it's interesting for me at least to study. But not only brains can go in an MRI machine. So these are many images just showing back to back, so it looks like a movie, of a fruit that is in an MRI machine. So I am mostly slowing down my speech so that you can take a second to guess what it might be. It is actually a pineapple. Hopefully you can kind of see it now that I've said it. And this one here is actually a vegetable. So it's starting at the base of the vegetable and going up. And that one is broccoli. So anything that has water in it, you can put into an MRI machine and make an image of it. As long as there's water molecules present. And this is a still version of the pineapple that I just showed you. And I'll show a couple others just so you have a better chance at guessing. This is another fruit. I think it's pretty easy to guess, so I'll go ahead and say it's a pear. This one is not a fruit or vegetable, but it is a plant. I think it's fairly easy to see as well. It's a sunflower. And this one's a little more difficult, but it is a fruit with lots of seeds in the middle, kind of small, kind of green. It's a kiwi, which you can see. So all of that to say, when scientists aren't doing science, sometimes we put fruits and vegetables into MRI machines to see what they look like. Now, I mentioned that you could do structure with MRI, but you can also do function, which is mostly what I'm interested in. So again, we can use that to look at what brains of older adults look like, how reading disability looks in the brain, as well as math, and also what it looks like to have attentional deficits and to struggle with that, and also how to help these people. So I won't go too much into that, but I'm happy to answer questions of any form about either brain structure or the colleges I went to just general questions that you might have about the brain.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. That was super, super cool. So one question is, like, so you said that the MRI is basically like a bunch, like a big, big magnet.
Mm-hmm.
How the heck does a magnet take a picture of a brain? How does that work?
So it plays on the water molecules. So since our brain has lots of water in it, magnets reorient water. So we can use that more or less in a very strong magnet, with a very strong magnet, to see the different tissue types that are in the brain, because some tissue types have more water, some have less. And with that, we can get a better idea of the structure of the brain.
That's super cool. I had no idea that's how MRIs worked. I knew they were like magnet related, but I didn't know. That's really, really, really cool. So if you had a favorite part of the brain that you like to focus on, what would that be?
It's perfect you asked that question, because it's highlighted in this picture, which is why I actually chose the picture. So this is the cerebellum. It's known as the little brain, and it's called the little brain because it actually has 3 times as many cells as the entire rest of the brain. So it's super small, but it's just very compact, extremely folded over and over again, which makes a really nice structure inside.
That's really cool. That's funny. The Dr. Griffith that we talked to before this said the same thing, that the cerebellum is her favorite part of the brain. It's definitely gorgeous. Like, if you look, I used to teach intro bio when I was in graduate school, and we would also have a sheep brain. And when you slice it in half and look at the cerebellum, it looks like this beautiful tree. I know, Sikoya, that you know that, but for our audience.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really, really beautiful. So what got you interested in neuroscience in the first place?
Yep. So I mentioned the science fair project back in 7th grade.
Yeah.
My dad actually gave me a word puzzle, and it was a really hard puzzle. And I was just thinking, why can my brain do this with words? What's happening? And it kind of started from there, just asking lots of questions of why and how, and then realizing that no one actually knows the answers quite yet.
Right.
But that I could be the person to look into some of these questions.
That's awesome. So if you could do me a favor, could you stop screen sharing, because it's helpful for our ASL folks, for Tammy to be as quick as possible. Awesome.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Great. So yeah, it's really cool. So if you had all the resources in the world to study neuroscience, what questions would you want to ask?
That is a good question. I would probably start with understanding MRI better, actually, because I know I explained it, but there's a few more details in there that aren't as clear cut. But I would also ask questions about how different brain regions are connected. So how the cerebellum is connected to the front of the brain, for example. What do those tracks really look like? We have some of those answers, but because the cerebellum is the way that it's folded over, it's a little difficult to map those tracks out. So I would definitely do that. Yeah.
Super cool. So you mentioned that you looked at the differences between adult brains and young kid brains. So like, are there things that kids do better than adults and that adults do better than kids? Like, what are the kind of specialties of each stage of development?
Yeah. So adults tend to do better with, let's say, more tedious tasks. So things that require a bit more attention, or task switching. But at the same time, kids around middle school age, high school age, tend to do better with what's known as the Stroop task, which I didn't include in the slideshow, but I thought about it. But it's where you show a word. It's usually a color. So like the word will read the color red, but it's in a different color. So it'll be in blue. And it kind of tricks the brain because you see the color that you want to name, but you're trying to read the word, and it's very conflicting. So kids between a particular age tend to be better at that. Yeah.
That's great. I remember, so when I was in college, they would offer me $100 to go bike to the other side of Boston to get MRIs for like various studies, and they would make me do that test. And oh my God, it is so hard. It sounds easy. You're like, I can do this. Like I can read words. Try it. It's so hard. Yeah, it's wild that it's like, why can't I do this? Like it seems so simple, but it's not simple. Michael would like to know, why are older people more prone to forgetfulness than younger people?
That's a great question. So the older you are, your brain changes, of course, but you do lose some of your brain cells. Not all of them, not saying you're like not going to have brain cells when you're older. But you do lose some of them along the way. So you do lose some of the connections that you have, which make it a little more difficult sometimes to retrieve those memories. Yeah.
Cool. The next question is, what causes abnormal growth in the brain?
Lots of things. So there's no one answer to that. But abnormal growths could be caused by things like tumors. But what causes the tumor can range. So it could be a genetic thing, so something that that is more innate. It could be something a little more environmental, like exposure to toxic things. Radiation, of course, is highly problematic. It's a range. There's a range of things that can cause it.
Yeah. So when you showed that picture of someone who had had a stroke, like, why is there no water there? Like, why does it look black? What's the deal?
So it's mostly because the tissue is gone. So once a brain region is damaged, the brain works very efficiently. So it'll clean it up basically. But after it cleans it up, that area is usually filled with the fluid that's in the brain. So your brain sits in a fluid called CSF, or cerebral spinal fluid. And that circulates all throughout the brain, that helps keep the debris out. It's very necessary. But when you do have injuries, it'll fill that region up after it's cleaned it with CSF.
So there's just no brain. Wow, I had no idea. That's wild. Cool. So if whatever part of the brain, like that area was responsible for, I know, like, so my stepmom had a stroke about 7 years ago, and it took her quite a while, but now she speaks almost regularly again. So how does your brain figure out how to like bridge the gap that's created by a stroke?
So the brain's really cool in that it adapts very, very well. Even if you are missing part of a brain region, like if you have a stroke, it will work to use other brain regions to replace it. So it'll basically remake connections and do what it needs to make you as close to possible as perfect again.
Okay, so here's a question. Is there any difference between, like just visually looking at it, between the brain of a person with mental health issues, various mental health issues, or that of a healthy person?
Usually no, but it does depend on the disorder that you're talking about. So sometimes mental health issues can be present in people who have enlarged ventricles, which is very easy to see. So the ventricles were the dark parts of the pictures that I showed, which is where the CSF is.
Right.
And those can expand, which can lead to symptoms that you might see in individuals with mental health disorders. The usual differences between individuals with mental health aren't as visible on anatomical scans as far as I know.
Right. There's like maybe little things between the synapses or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you'd have to do more molecular, look at the cellular levels, things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I know during this pandemic, my serotonin is not firing on all cylinders, I'll tell you that. It's been a bummer. Anyway, so I guess our next question is like, are all brains, when sometimes people will get opened up for surgery and all of their organs are like flipped?
Mm-hmm.
Does the brain ever have that happen? Where like something that's normally in your right brain is over here on your left brain and like everything's flip-flopped?
I would say no, but only because the brain kind of reorganizes and organizes itself based off of your life experience. So although things are generally in certain areas, like vision will always be in the back of the brain, things like that. But as far as like there's a part of the region brain, that recognizes whole words or is thought to recognize whole words. But it's usually in a general similar area for everyone, but it's not in the exact same place. So I would say the brain kind of does that naturally, and that everything has like a general area or a region that it is, but those regions might be slightly shifted for different people.
Cool. Do you have any like fun facts about the brain that you think everybody should know?
The cerebellum is the best. It's not a fact, that's an opinion. One fun fact would be that if you stretched out your brain as much as you could through all the, after all the folds, I am told, it wouldn't be able to fit on the earth. So it would be just long. If you stretch it out, it would be very thin.
Whoa.
But there's a lot of brain cells there that would stretch out.
That's wild. That's bananas. That's great. Let's see. Dee would like to know, are there food or activities that are known to be good for your brain or for a specific part of your brain?
Yes. So eating healthy helps in general because your brain does run on your blood supply. So you want to be as healthy as possible. Have lots of iron. Iron is great for you and your brain as well. As far as, what was the second part of the question? Food and exercise? Or activities?
Activities, yes.
Yes, exercise would be my answer to that. There are plenty of studies showing that exercise generally helps your brain stay healthy, helps you stay active. The more active you are, the better.
Cool. What does caffeine do to the brain?
So caffeine does make you more alert. I would lead with that. I'm not the best person to answer that. This is exactly what it does with the brain.
One thing that I've learned in the process of running Skype a Scientist is that people think that, like, for example, I'm a squid biologist, and so some people will think, oh, I'm a marine biologist, which is true, I am a marine biologist, but then assume that I therefore know everything about the ocean, and it's just too big. Like neuroscience, the brain is too big to know everything, and so I think it's really, really great to say I don't know, because even if we know, like humankind knows the answer, it's impossible for one scientist to know everything. It's just like it's never going to happen, especially as we're learning more things all the time. So I think breaking down the like intimidation factor. When I was a kid, I was like, man, scientists, I don't know how I could ever know as much as a scientist knows. It's like I don't really know that much. I just know a lot about squid. Cool. So Michael wants to know, what foods can help improve the functionality of the brain?
I am told fish, because of the iron. Lots of fruits and vegetables, of course. Mostly just having a well-balanced diet, I think, is the key.
So it's not like there aren't like necessarily superfoods like eat blueberries and salmon every day, and it's just being healthy broadly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's solid advice.
There are people who will say like superfoods exist, like blueberries. I am not well read enough on that to agree or disagree.
Yeah, I think just be healthy. Like you generally know that a fresh food is better than a Pop-Tart. So not that I still love Pop. Yeah, just be healthy and it's great. So okay, Fox would like to know what happens to the dead cells in your brain. Where do they go?
Yeah, so that actually comes back to the CSF that I mentioned earlier. So the brain has a very nice system to break down debris because you have active cells and they use things and then they toss them out more or less. And you have to get rid of them. So the brain does that with CSF. So the CSF will, all the extra debris, dead cells, ends up there and gets washed out. Also, I will say there are other brain cells. So the main brain cell is a neuron, which is the one that is in your gray and white matter for the most part. And then you have glial cells. So these are support helper cells that can help break down things like those dead cells or other things in the brain that need to be taken care of. Some of those cells will phagocytose, which means they'll eat the debris. But in the end, to get it out, it'll end up in the CSF and be flushed out.
Sounds good. So, okay, we know that our skin cells and like the cells inside of our gastrointestinal tract, they're like constantly being turned over. But our neurons are for life, basically, right? So, how does one cell survive like 60 years? Like how? And how do they like renew and stay sharp, I guess?
So you do make new cells. You don't make them as easily or as efficiently when you're older as when you're younger. But yeah, your cells last for a long time. Especially cells that are related to motor function, for example. So those cells are the ones that help me move and talk with my hands so that I do way too much. But they run from your brain to whichever region of your body that you're trying to move, more or less. And those cells, once they're damaged, it is problematic, since it is just like a really long track from point A to B. Right. But you can make other new cells in the brain. Yeah.
Cool. So when we're like moving our toes and our fingertips, like how many motor neurons are responsible? Like, do we have 5 so that if one breaks, you've got 4 to play backup? Or is it like you got one and if you mess that up, you're toast? Like, how does that work?
So I know the answer isn't 1, but I'm not sure of how many.
How many? Yeah.
I know there are, I would say there's a group of cells dedicated to moving, like, say, your hand, because there is a hand region of the brain, and there's going to be multiple cells there. And it'll come to your spinal cord, and then from your spinal cord, there'll be another cell that goes from spinal cord to your hand, or whichever region of your hand. So it's kind of like a relay system, but it is problematic once the first connection from brain to spinal cord is severed.
Yeah, for sure. One time I was doing field work in Hawaii and I found this really big crab and I thought it was just cool. And so I wanted to play with it. Don't play with crabs, kids at home. It's a bad idea. I got bitten by that crab and it dropped its claw. So like the crab ran away, but the claw was stuck on my thumb. And so it like grabbed on here. I couldn't feel the tip of my thumb for 2 months. It was wild, but now it's all good. I can feel it again. So I don't know how that got cured, but anyway, it was exciting. A bummer, but I thought I was never going to feel the tip of my thumb ever again. Cool. So everyone, here we go. Someone is just thanking us for being here and all that. So how did you decide what school to go to when you were deciding to be a neuroscientist?
Honestly, I Googled neuroscience in college, to be completely honest. At the time, this was many years ago, I know that I look youthful, but I'm not that young. At the time, there were only a few neuroscience programs to choose from, and Duke was actually not one of them. The neuroscience program at Duke started while I was there. So I was very lucky and fortunate to be able to actually major in neuroscience. But I looked for schools that had courses that I were interested in. So I looked for course titles that seemed interesting. I looked to see that they had backup majors actually that I could also be interested in case this one didn't work out. Yeah, definitely suggest looking at the courses and the kinds of topics that they teach and not just the broad neuroscience, because neuroscience is pretty big. So if you're interested in more cell stuff or more psychology things, definitely look into that.
Awesome. Michael asked, I think this is like one of these impossible questions that we get a lot, is which university is the best at neuroscience?
There are many universities that are the best. It depends on what you're interested in. So for example, the Northeast, there's a whole group of universities, like the Harvard, Boston cluster area. They have a really big imaging center, multiple imaging centers, to be honest. So it's a great area if you're interested in neuroimaging of almost any form. Duke has a great neuroscience program, and they also let their their students, do internships with scientists that are there. And I know from experience, it's very easy to get involved with that. And there's a broad array to choose from. Also on the West Coast, there's University of California, Berkeley has a very great neuroscience program. I know I'm skipping over many others, but they do exist. Yeah.
For sure. Here's a question. If you could put anything into an MRI, like whatever, like, don't worry about the size of the MRI, like this MRI in our imagination, get it as big as you want, what would you scan?
I just scan more brains, but I'm biased. Yes, I'm very biased.
More human brains or
more human brains?
More human brains. Okay.
Yeah. So there are people who study animals. So they do scan like primates, monkeys. They scan dogs, but not as frequently anymore. Cats, mice. So there are plenty of brain scans out there that aren't humans as well.
Awesome. Squid and octopus have a central brain, and then have a bunch, every arm has a ganglion, which is like a little blob. I know you know this, but for the crowd, everyone. Like a blob of neurons, it's like a mini brain almost. So if you were to scan a squid brain, it would be like so weird and so different. So that might be fun. That's awesome. So, although I wonder, are water animals different because there's water that they're in when you're looking at?
Their tissue no, because they still have tissues.
Of different tissues. Okay, cool. When I tried to CAT scan a squid one time, and it was just a blob. It looked ridiculous. So other than MRI, are there other ways that you can visualize a brain?
There are. The most apparent, I guess, is gross anatomy. So actually looking at the brain, like in your hand. But also you can do EEG, like you mentioned. So that isn't the brain visualization that you're probably thinking of, but it produces a map of brain waves and how those brain waves kind of ripple off of different parts of the brain. There are others. So I mentioned MRI as a technique to look at structure and function, but you can do many other things with MRI. So you can also look at those tracks that I mentioned before, like that go from the front to the back of the brain, with something called DTI. It's a different imaging method, but it also plays off of water molecules and basically looks at the direction that they're pointing. And then you can kind of model where tracks in the brain are going.
Awesome. And now that we're talking about EEGs, I just want to mention one more time, for everybody in the audience, if you want to sign up to win a home kit EEG, go to the answered questions tab of the Q&A. And the first question that we answered here has a link, or you can just type into your browser bit.ly/neuroscience kit, and you can sign up to win one of those. We'll be giving away 3 of those through the Black and Neuro group at the end of today. Awesome. So is there any questions that you wish we had asked you today?
That I wish you would have asked?
Yeah, like you're like, I can't believe we didn't talk about my favorite thing, this thing about brains.
I don't know. I feel like I should have an answer to that.
It's okay.
um, no, I think the questions were great. Um, I am always happy to answer more questions about choosing colleges or choosing a topic to think about in college, because although I am a neuroscientist and I love science and STEM, there are other things to do that are equally as interesting. Um, yeah.
Do you have any advice for middle schoolers who are maybe trying to figure out like what they like in general?
Definitely try to do an internship. And it's not always called an internship. You can volunteer.
Uh-huh.
Volunteering at different places will definitely give you an idea of what it's like. At one point, I thought I wanted to be a physical therapist, and I volunteered there and discovered that was not what I wanted.
Yeah.
But it was a great experience and a great way to know what it's like to actually be a physical therapist. What does their day-to-day life look like? Who do they interact with? Things like that.
That's great. Sounds good. Yeah, and ask experts because we're just people, and we're pretty available. So if you're new to the Skype a Scientist program, just so you know, we will match up families during the pandemic and classrooms with scientists, and we've got like 5,000 scientists ready to go. So if you go to skypeascientist.com and hover over the tab that says chat with a scientist, there's a scientist search tool in there. And maybe at home you're like, man, I love bees. I think I want to work with bees forever. You can type in the word bees or brains or squid, whatever you want, and all of our scientists that study that thing will be populated on a list. And then you can request to speak with that scientist specifically at home. And so if you want that FaceTime with experts, like a pandemic is a great time to do that because the scientists are stuck at home just like you are. So feel free. Oh, and our program is totally free. So sign up if that sounds like something that's interesting to you. We've got two questions that we ask everybody that comes on Skype a Scientist Live. The first is if you had the attention of everyone in the world and you had to tell them one thing about neuroscience, what would that be?
I would tell them to read more and interact with neuroscientists. We love talking to you guys. And I know that's not like a neuroscience fact or anything, but I'm very big on attempting to engage the community and share what we do know about neuroscience. I don't think that it should be a black box. I know that we have our own terminology and things that we use, but that doesn't mean that you, middle schooler or parents watching, can't understand it. It's meant, we do it so that you can. We do it so the information's out there. So yeah, ask questions, read things, email people, talk to us.
Awesome. And the second question that we ask everybody is, you still have the attention of everybody in the world in this situation, but you can tell them one thing that's unrelated to neuroscience. It can be as silly and insignificant, like, I don't know, pink starburst is the best starburst, or serious and significant as you'd like. What one piece of information do you want in every brain in the world of a human?
Bake more often. And this is also completely biased. So baking is what I do when I'm stressed. I'll share that with you guys.
Uh-huh.
But I think it's such a fun activity that people forget about, and they think that it is a little tedious sometimes depending on what you bake, but it doesn't have to be. You can pick an easier item. It's a great way to like clear your mind and just be for a second. And also you get a product out of it that usually tastes great as long as you follow the recipe.
Wow. Bake more often. I'm taking that to heart today. That sounds like a great way for me to spend my Friday night indoors. Great. Well, thank you so much. Is there first of all, where can we find you on social media?
Yes, so you can find me on Twitter at Sikotree, Siko tree, because Sequoia is a tree and tree is usually in most of my usernames. I'm on Twitter. I am not extremely active, but I do post great things when I post them. And you can also find me on LinkedIn with just my name, Sikoya Ashburn. There's not very many Sikoya Ashburns out there. Yeah.
Is there anything that you'd like to plug before we wrap up?
No, keep an eye out for all the great neuroscience that's happening. It's going to be a few more years before I'm publishing again because I'm starting a new job right now. But yeah, just keep your ears and eyes open for all the great neuroscience that's out there.
Awesome. Well, thank you for taking the time to talk with us today. I've learned a lot, and I really appreciate it. And Tammy, thank you for signing for us. We really appreciate you taking the time to be with us too.
Thank you.
All right. Oh, yeah. There we go. So join us back here in about 20 minutes. We're going to be doing, if you're interested in hearing all about neuroscience at the high school level. And also follow Black and Neuro on Twitter. They're doing such cool stuff this week, and I bet we should continue paying attention to them going forward, because it's been a fun week to watch. All right. Thank you all for being here, and we'll see you soon. Bye, everyone.
Bye.